Hello, my name is Jasmine Woodson. I am the recruiting manager for the Blexit Foundation and the director of Tennessee Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. I am here today because I think Tennessee should stay free, stay very much pro 2A, and I just want to be a part of the fight.
Yeah, so my name is Mekkos Beech. It's a weird name, so people call me Memphis. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served for 9 years. I'm a deadly force instructor. We teach out of Top Gun Memphis, and I'm also the owner of Memphis Beech Coaching. I'm also a competitive shooter. I'm a master class in IDPA and GSSF, A class, and USPSA. So just out here to allow people to not allow people to learn more. That sounds pretty pretentious, but just helping out where I can, really.
And for those that missed it earlier, my name is Kerry Slone. I am the founder of We the Female. It's a nonprofit organization that, in short, arms the women with education, confidence, and self-defense. I'm a domestic violence survivor that stumbled into gun rights advocacy, discussing red flag laws and other laws that limit access through what seem to be goodwill intentions for keeping people safe, but actually these particular gun laws do more harm than good, particularly to domestic violence survivors.
Awesome. I'll send it back this way again so that not the same person has to go first every time. Tell us either the biggest or the most common lie that you hear about either guns or Second Amendment rights, and why it's such a negative thing for those lies to be so common.
Well, I'll just go with a blanketed term on that, and that is the term gun violence. There is no such thing as gun violence. It is a made-up term to push an emotional agenda. My ex-husband almost killed me with his fists, and I don't hear people calling for more common sense fist control. What day was that in Illinois, wasn't it? Just last week, where there was a knife attack? Yeah, and 4 people dead, 9 injured, 4 people dead. Well, I don't know what the latest report is. Last I heard, you don't hear people calling for more common sense knife control because of knife violence. The reason I want to point that one out in particular is because I am finding a disturbing number of people that are more conservative leaning or pro 2A that are starting to use that terminology, because that is the point, is they subtly introduce these types of terms in ways that eventually people start using them. And sometimes with conservatives, they start using them in reference to what somebody says on the other side, but then it just ends up becoming part of the conversation. So I want people to realize, there's a lot of, we could go on for hours really to answer that question, but one of the biggest lies, if not arguably the biggest one that sets the stage for the entire conversation, is the term gun violence is not, it's not a thing. There's violence committed with guns. There's violence committed with fists. There's violence committed with knives. But there is no such thing as gun violence.
Yeah. So the biggest lie that I hear very, very often is that all you have to do if your life is ever in danger is just call 911 and someone will magically come to your rescue. Somehow, some way, Superman is going to fly out of the clouds and he's going to come by and he's going to rescue you. We looked at the statistics this morning. We looked at the cases. Not all of these offenses are reported, and all of the arrests are convictions. Like we talked about the clearance rates earlier today. Like we have a staggering number of these cases that are going unsolved. 50% of murders here in Nashville PD, Nashville Metro PD, 50% of the murders are going unsolved. So 60% of the aggravated assault, which is really attempted murder, that's really what it is going unsolved. We talked about the crime that starts with the letter R. 86% of those are going unsolved. And only 1 in 4 of those are actually getting reported. You are your own first responder. No one is coming to save you. And if 911 is your only security plan, you're relying on a system that only works about 24% of the time.
Great answers, you guys. I would say for me, one of the most shocking things would be finding out that the majority of gun deaths are by suicide. And I don't think a lot of people know that. There's a lot of things that have been conflated to scare us with guns, but knowing that the majority of gun deaths are suicide is very telling. You don't really see too many suicide mothers of who lost their children to suicide. You don't see them up at the Capitol asking to take guns away.
So if you could speak a little bit more to that, and again, I would love everyone to chime in, and feel free to, piggyback off something that someone else says if you want. This is a relatively informal. I don't think we have a ton of competing ideas here, but I'd like to bounce them off each other. You mentioned the suicides, right? So someone will give you their gun violence or gun deaths or whatever they're going to call it, right? And then they're not going to tell you that half of those are self-inflicted, right? Or are negligent discharge, right? They're accidents, and we can talk about how to prevent those in a little bit here. Why do we think that the government, right? Why do we think that these agencies, when they talk about guns being the number one killer of children in America, or when they tell you, when they include all of these extra kind of data sets, why do we think the government is doing it that way, or that these agencies are doing it that way? And are there any kind of key statistics or false statistics that you think it's important that we address?
So I can actually speak directly to those statistics. I used to work for John Lott at the Crime Prevention Research Center, who is the only individual, he's not alone in what he does. There's other people, researchers. It's the only organization that actually does any sort of research that directly combats, and not by intention. His intention wasn't, I didn't create this organization to combat these. He actually stumbled into doing it, finding the inconsistencies in numbers for crimes with guns. And approximately, depending on the year, it changes, 70 to 75% of all firearm deaths are suicides. And of those 70 to 75%, the majority, well over 50% of them, are usually men. Yet men are still one of the most stigmatized mental health segments. We obviously have a mental health crisis, but our men really, you have one side that it's, let's just call it what it is. Some of that mental illness is blatant, and they're not getting help. But on the other side, particularly among conservative men, you don't see them getting mental health care as much. It's not talked about as much. And so that is a concern. Additionally, when we're talking about statistics, there is data that exists. I did not pull these numbers. I should have. Had I known, I would have pulled the numbers. But you can find it yourself. You can go to crimeresearch.org if you want, or you can go to the FBI if you want to dig through that. But the numbers do exist to show you that gun control laws, particularly red flag laws or any sort of laws that are supposed to keep guns out of the hands of people that are suicidal, particularly those ERPOs, does not reduce the number of suicides. What they found is that suicides, they'll just find another method if a firearm is not available. So there is a fallacy that, you can literally find flaw with every single gun control law that's ever been put in place, because there has never been a gun control law in American history that's actually reduced or eradicated any sort of violence with guns, ever. That being said, there is the data that shows not only for suicide, but also with restraining orders. When we get into the restraining orders, which gets into red flag laws and stuff, there's also data that proves that restraining orders do not reduce the number of deaths with or without a gun of domestic violence victims. So the idea that we're supposed to be keeping guns out of the hands of people to preserve them, to keep them from committing suicide is just false. They're going to find a way to do it anyway. So rather than addressing or trying to enact more gun control laws that don't work, we need to be addressing the mental health crisis. And there are organizations out there that do that. One of them in particular is called Hold My Guns. That's a great organization. You go to holdmyguns.org, and they work with gun stores to help when you feel like you're in a crisis situation, or you have a family member you feel is in a crisis situation. They work with gun stores to safely store your firearms for you until you're out of your mental health crisis. So they're literally finding solutions that actually save lives rather than just putting more crappy laws in place that aren't going to help anybody. And to your point about why they're really doing it, you asked about why they're really wanting to do these laws. We know why they're doing it, right? And that's a conversation that gets too big, and that's when people start shutting down. Is the real reason they're just using all of these stepping stones to what that bigger agenda is.
Yeah, what Kerry said was absolutely right. Not only did she plug Sarah Joy Albright of Hold My Guns, but I can echo those same sentiments in my own experience. During my 9 years in the Marine Corps and then the years thereafter, I know, there's a lot of my brothers that lost the battle to their demons. I stopped keeping track at 20. And these guys are not getting the help they need because they're afraid that they're going to lose the ability that they have to protect themselves and their loved ones. They're simply not getting the help they need. And so that's one of the reasons why they're not getting the help they need, because of ERPOs. And the second reason is because the VA, in my own experience and the experience of my brothers, is absolutely inept at doing their jobs. Go figure, right? We trust the government to do something and they don't do it. Man, where have I heard that before? So, all right. Yeah. Thank you.
No, I think you guys did great answering his question. I was going to echo what you said, which was it doesn't matter if the guns are taken away, suicide will still happen. And so I don't really have much more to add to that. Thank you guys. That was awesome.
Well, I'll keep it with you then for a second, because I want to transition, and I think that this conversation will naturally take itself through a few things we talked about, because we want to protect our kids, right? We don't want crazy people going out and mass murdering or shooting up schools. We don't want people who are having a mental health crisis to do the worst thing that they could do, right? To make the decision you can't unmake. But we also don't seem to trust the government to handle things. Case in point with the VA, right? So my question would be this. What, if any, place does government have as far as any kind of gun legislation or programs, whether it's for domestic violence or suicide watch or any of that? And if we could specifically kind of let that tie back into specifically red flag laws, who are those going to impact the most, and where do you see that going if they are implemented?
So definitely I feel like it'll impact everybody. I don't want to say who it will impact the most. It just depends on what state, the demographic of your state or the demographic of the city that you live in. But obviously, I do think it will affect minority communities on a larger scale. I don't think the government has any other right outside of educating us about why the Second Amendment is important. I don't think they have the government should be forced to do anything for us outside of educating us about it. I do think organizations that are helping with domestic violence victims or victims, people who have lost their child to the gun going off accidentally, or just things like that, organizations that do that that they're amazing, but I don't feel like the government should have to do anything again outside of educating us on why the Second Amendment is important.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with Jasmine here. Look, I want a government that's so small I could barely see it. Okay, I can't trust the government any further than I can throw them. And when it comes down to stuff like ERPOs or making decisions about criminalizing people specifically for the possession of something, that's really what kind of burns my biscuits. Like, imagine a world where this water bottle right here, imagine a world where the government says, hey, you're no longer allowed to have this, regardless of whether I hurt anybody with it or not. Just the fact that I have it, they're making a judgment call about my mental capacities with this water bottle. If I hurt nobody with this water bottle, then why is the government all up in my business? Time and time again, I see the government making massive mistakes massive mistakes about everything they touch. I really don't want them deciding something as simple as having something being criminalized. I just don't agree with it.
So, to your point, and I want to talk about him a little bit before I expand on this. There is a case right now. He goes by Carbon Mike on Twitter, and Futurecast Radio, I believe it is. And he right now, they just had jury selection this week on a case where the state raided his home a couple of years, I think it was a year ago, maybe about a year ago. And he was an engineer, and he was manufacturing his own firearms as a hobby, just for fun. And the state is now charging him with several different gun crimes, lots of felonies he's facing. God bless him, because he is actually willing to fight. He's like, I ain't scared of going to jail, which we need more of that, right? That's really what it comes down to. You want to see the fight. They threaten you with that stuff, and that's how they get their plea bargains and all that kind of stuff. But in the state of New York, there are a certain list, I should say, of firearms that if you are in possession of them, the state defines that as you intending to use them to do harm. So just like you were talking about with the water bottle, how, they can all of a sudden decide, oh, you're going to hurt somebody with that. So they literally have done that. So these objects that have just sat in his hobby room, all of a sudden he had intention of doing harm. In that case, for some reason, it blows my mind, is not getting the press that it should get. And because that's a big deal, right? If they rule in favor of the state and he goes to jail, that's going to set a huge precedence. And so why that's not getting more coverage is beyond me. That being said, when we talked about how some of these laws affect certain communities and things, yet again, there is data out there. And again, they don't want you to know that this all comes down to money, right? And it comes down to the money that is out there that is funding gun, quote unquote, gun violence versus good done with guns, for lack of a better term. And there's actual statistics and data out there that also shows, you can go to the FBI or crimeresearch.org again. General. Most of the research has been done in the black communities, Chicago and some of the higher black populated areas, Atlanta. Low-income individuals, people that can't afford to be able to buy a gun to defend themselves, and women. And then pulling up the tail end on that was the disabled. And so those are the demographics that are most disproportionately affected by gun control laws. Yet nobody goes in, they want to control more guns. Like we see this in Chicago, right? This is a big one in Chicago and just recently in Baltimore, right? They're not responding. Now you've got cops that aren't responding in Baltimore now, right? So, but they want to continue to control the guns as opposed to going in and dealing with the gang violence issues that are going on and dealing with the core of why gang violence is actually continuing to occur. And because they think that putting these laws in place, look, I'm just going to say it. Here's the reality of why these laws are put in place. You have politicians that could give two shits about you or anybody else that's out there. All they want to do is to continue to get reelected and live off of your tax dollars. So you can always tell. Thank you. I said what I said. And I'm not done. So you can always tell when there's an election year and there's a hot button topic, right? Here's what you see come up. You see abortion, gun violence, and of course this year immigration is obviously a big one. Immigration getting ready to flip a lot of states, though, in a lot of cities. I'm just saying. So watch that one closely, especially in Chicago. They'll start on these talking points. They'll drop legislation. And then they're proud of that, right? That's another thing. Side note on that. They're proud. We dropped, like Washington State, we just dropped 300 bills. I'm like, you shouldn't have dropped any. Like, the whole point of government is to be limited. Don't be proud that you dropped all of these bills. That's crazy. But in their minds, that's how they're justifying those paychecks that they're getting, right? So what they do is they put out these crazy gun control laws, and 9 times out of 10, if you look at who's sponsoring those bills, I bet you they're up for re-election, right? So then if they pass, now they're the heroes for passing the legislation. If they fail, they can play victim and say, well, we tried and there was nothing we could do, but if you keep me in office, I'll keep trying. That is the real reason that they put these bills out there. They don't give a crap about your safety. If they did, they'd have more police and like with Jasmine, justice reform, the criminal justice system, because that thing is a hot mess, right? You want to fix problems, fix the criminal justice system. That's what needs to be fixed. But they don't care. So all of they're doing is to use one of the terms from the gun control side. It's a virtue signal. They don't even really care if those laws get passed or not, because they really know at the core that they're ineffective. And when they're ineffective, it just justifies them to continue to put out more bullshit legislation that they know isn't going to get enacted, but then they can pretend like they're doing their jobs to continue to take your tax dollars as a paycheck.
Mekkos, is there any type of firearm that should be illegal?
Man, I think there's some airsoft guns out there that, dude, I don't know, man. It just makes it really hard to have a competitive advantage, you know? So, and then there's some BB guns that are really, really dangerous out there too, you know? Like, did you know that they actually look like real guns? That's crazy. No, I'm kidding, of course. But, dude, I'm in the camp of, like, we should – they're going to take that. It's going to be a soundbite. But dude, we should be able to buy full autos on Amazon, have them shipped to your door, next day shipping. You know what I mean? I really, really just dislike the ability for government to say, hey, that thing right there that you have that you've never hurt anybody with yet or ever. Man, I got a safe full of guns that are never going to hit anything but cardboard and steel. They're never going to be used on a human person, ever. Why? Because if someone does break into my house, I got tools for that. Okay, there's tools for social work, but there are other tools that I have that are just for competitive shooting. So, man, what gun should be illegal? I don't know. The one they can't say I have? I don't know.
So I'm gonna leave it with y'all for a second to have a conversation. But for those of you who don't know or might have missed it or just tuned in, and for those of you watching online, there are thousands of people here. It's amazing. Just great turnout. We appreciate all of you here and at home. We have 2 firearms instructors here, and then we have someone who is really well versed in the judicial system, justice reform, right? How these laws actually end up panning out. So I would like to hear from the instructors specifically, if you have any thoughts or advice on the use application, or if there's anything that you'd like to share for people who might be considering learning a bit about guns. I know here revolvers are the best for women. We can have that conversation. But I also want to talk about, like, if these laws aren't working, how is it impacting our youth, our minorities, as far as the criminal justice system? And I think, Jasmine, you can maybe talk a little bit about how that cycle, right, that school to prison cycle works out as well. So those are just some questions, but open it for you guys to talk amongst yourselves too.
Okay, well, I don't like to call it the criminal justice system because there is no justice. It's the criminal legal system.
Say that a little louder for the people in the back. A little bit louder, sister. A little bit louder.
But yeah, of course, we all know of the school to prison pipeline. We know of certain laws in place, like even the 94 crime bill. If we go back to that, at one point, black people were asking for that. You know, the majority of the black caucus wanted the 94 crime bill. And then you look at Memphis today, a lot of the black leaders in Memphis are asking for stricter things be done in the legal system to especially children who get caught with a murder or breaking into a car, whatever. We're asking for these things, but we don't know how they'll pan out 20 years from now. Kind of like the crime bill of 94. They were asking for it, but they didn't realize that that would lock up a lot of black men and tear apart a lot of black families. So what we're doing right now, we're just kind of like the test dummies for what's to come in the future. We don't really know because in Tennessee we've been pretty pro 2A. It's been, and thankfully we do have a governor who has been, I know a lot of people might not like him, but I feel like he's been pretty strong compared to what he's had to face with all of the activists coming in saying protect children. And we all know that's a buzzword when it comes to getting the majority support. So like I said, we're just a test dummies right now. We can't really say, I can't tell you exactly what will happen years from now, but I do see a lot more people being locked up. And since the legal system isn't a place for justice, when those people do get back out, they're not going to be healed. And we have a truth in sentencing law now where if you do commit a violent crime, you do have to do your whole 100% of your sentence. There is no good time or anything like that. So being in there, say you do something, it's 20 years, you have that whole 20 years, you come out with no mental health counseling, nothing to better yourself, no money in your pocket, you'll probably turn to crime again. So
Can I ask you a question on that? So I don't know if y'all noticed, but I'm white, so this is not something I feel like I got a space to speak on. You had mentioned when the 94 crime bill, which, by the way, Biden would love to tell you was a huge part of making that happen. He's very proud of that. And we know how Kamala financially benefited from that. You had made the comment that it ended up inadvertently putting a lot of black people behind bars, particularly men, and separating the families, and that they didn't realize. Do you really think that they didn't realize? Or do you think that maybe there was some low-key intention with that?
Well, when I say they didn't realize, I'm referring to most of the people, because even public support, there was a lot of public support. You got to think when you're in a neighborhood and 80% of your houses are crack houses and you have all these people coming in and out of the neighborhood, of course, they want whatever can happen to stop that. Sure. Kind of like the children dying. They're like, okay, well, let's stop guns. You know, they kind of just go to the source or what they think is the source. So, no, of course, I feel like there were some people in power who knew what they were doing when it came to that, but they knew they would be able to get a lot of the majority of the support, especially from the black community where these crimes are taking place.
Let's see. So that was the question for us instructors, right? Like, what do we want to convey to folks that are considering gun ownership? Is that
familiar with guns, people who are considering learning more, maybe taking a safety class, maybe buying one, maybe they just don't know anything?
I know it's a drum that I keep beating, right? But you should really consider training as part of gun ownership. Like if you ask a lot of gun owners, if you ask a lot of concealed carriers, a lot of responsibly armed citizens, hey, why do you carry what you carry? Usually the answer is going to be so I can protect myself and my loved ones, right? Well, what we need to understand is what crime looks like and what skill looks like. Like, what do these threats look like? If you're concerned about carjackings, then you need to go and research. You need to go online. You need to look at dash cam, badge cam, surveillance footage of what carjackings look like, and then go visit an instructor or start a correspondence with an instructor. Hit them up on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or whatever have you. Send them an email about, hey, what's the best way for me to defend against carjackings, right? So, or, if and also go to those instructors that you really, really trust. Like, for instance, if there's somebody in my family that is very, very afraid of firearms, and I know that Kerry is just really awesome about people like that she is a great way instructor, then guess what? I'm going to send her to Kerry. Or if I know that, hey, she could really use a range day with Jasmine, why wouldn't I send her to Jasmine? Why wouldn't I do that? So if you have loved ones in your family that are concerned about that, or if you're concerned about, about whether or not you have enough skill or if you understand what violence looks like, get up with some people that are trustworthy and that are knowledgeable and start to understand what this violence looks like.
I love that, and especially with particular violent incidences specifically, and learning about that. I really like that a lot. Two things that I've come to observe as I travel around the country teaching. For those that don't know that, my organization provides free training. We do paid training as well, but we also provide financial assistance to women, particularly single mothers, domestic violence victims, and elders that can't afford training, because nobody, I don't care what age you are, I don't care what color your skin is, I don't care what your religious preference is, I don't care what your political views are. Everybody has a right to defend themselves. Period. But what I have found as I travel across, and nobody should be denied that training because they can't afford it, and that's where we stepped in. And I'm grateful to say, I do want to make a point of saying this. Thank you to the USCCA, who my organization, my nonprofit, has recently partnered with to allow us to expand that reach of free firearms training and concealed carry permit training for women across the country. So thank you, USCCA, for that. But two observations I've had as I travel around the country teaching, and one is the fear of guns is absolutely regional. Right? People in the South, even the women, they may not be gun women themselves. They may not carry a gun, but they're not afraid of them because it's a cultural thing. Whereas you get out to the West Coast, where I lived for 20 years in Washington State, there's a fear of them, which can only be, the reasonable deduction there is that it's what's being programmed into their minds through the media and their friends and so on. Obviously politically driven. I don't want to. I hate that that's the case, and that I have to bring that up. But that's a reality. It's absolutely politically driven. But another thing that I've come to notice after moving from Washington to the South, and when I live in the South, I'm not in Atlanta. I'm in Georgia, down in the country, is the lack of, they think that because they learned how to shoot a gun from their grandpa that they're prepared for an incident to happen. Or in a woman's case, they just don't carry at all. Well, a lot of women don't carry after their first class, and that's a huge issue that, that we want to change, right? There's obviously a disconnect in education and training and outreach. If these women, right, in 20, 21, and 22, 50% of new gun purchases were made by women. And in 20 and 21, 40% of that 50% were our black sisters in cities. What's that telling you? That's telling you that they know that they've got to figure out how to take care of themselves. The problem is the overwhelming majority of them still aren't carrying after they take that initial class. That means that there is some sort of disconnect with education and outreach. These women, if they're not carrying it, still means that after that initial class, they're not following up because they're not feeling confident in some way. That's where my organization tries to step in to help bridge that gap between the average woman in America that wants to buy her first gun and most first level of fundamental training. We want to bring people up, particularly women, get them confident so that we can send them to people like Memphis and help them to move forward in their journey with that comfortability. That being said, there is still a huge cultural mindset in the South with women not carrying. It's a lot of, my husband, I walked into I don't want to get too anecdotal and go down the rabbit hole of that, but I walked into a dress store because out where I live in the country, we still have men and women's dress shop. We have dress shops and men's clothing stores. we don't have shopping malls where I live. And there was a couple gals in there, and a guy walked in, creeped him out. And something you can say in Georgia or even in Tennessee that you can't say in Washington is, I said, "You got a gun behind the counter?" And of course they didn't. And their first response was, "Oh, my boyfriend or my husband carries a gun. I don't carry a gun." I said, "Where's your boyfriend now? Where's your husband now?" And they were silent about that. They didn't have an answer because they don't think about that, because they get this disconnect that that's my husband's thing and I know he'll take care of me. Well, your husband isn't going to be with you 24/7, and if he is, that's a whole other conversation. We need to have ladies reach out to me because that's concerning. But that disconnect is definitely cultural, I feel, and that we've got to figure out how to get women to understand. So in these more liberal-leaning states, we have to help that are where you're going to see more women that want more gun control. You're going to have to get them to understand more how gun control laws are going to affect their lives personally. And you do that by pushing that emotional button for them. And I don't mean that in a manipulative way. I mean that for women as empaths, we tend to be, not that men can't be empaths, but women tend to inherently be more empathetic, and there's negative connotations that are put out there that being ruled by emotion is a bad thing, and that's not a bad thing if we know how to harness that in the right way. So you have to be able to reach women in a way that they communicate, and that is going to be more emotional. In the South, we have to get them to understand your husband ain't going to be there all the time to protect you. I had a woman come right after I moved down there. She came out to help me get some stuff organized in my house. And I said, I didn't think I'd be teaching a lot down here in Georgia because everybody has guns and, it's just a different culture. And she said something to me that really stuck with me. As an instructor, you'll appreciate this. She said, "Oh, we know how to shoot guns. Our redneck husbands teach us how to shoot guns off the back porch. We don't know how to be gun owners." That was huge. That stuck with me because they don't. And I can't tell you how many times I hear, "Oh, I know how to shoot a gun." Okay, well, you might know how to shoot a gun because your husband loaded it, racked the slide for you, and then you stood out to shoot the beer cans or whatever, right? But do you know how to operate that gun on your own? Do you know, more importantly, when not to use that gun and when to walk away? Because ladies and gentlemen, you are too pretty for prison. And you want to be able to walk away from a situation, and not just for legal reasons, but for psychological and emotional reasons, financial reasons. You want to be able to walk away from one of those situations at all costs until you can't. And instead of just teaching how do I want to say this? I don't want to keep rambling on. I want to wrap this up, but this is important because this is something I deal with. I deal with this every day. It's one thing to get people, particularly women, into a firearms class and teaching them how to pull a trigger. It's another thing to get them to understand a holistic approach to self-defense. And getting them to understand that begins with avoiding a situation where you may need to use the gun to begin with, but more importantly, that you're probably going to freeze in a situation where, just because you know how to pull a trigger doesn't mean you know how to be able to defend yourself in a situation. And so we've got to get people, particularly women, to understand that, and I think that's going to be a bigger challenge in the South, honestly, than it would be among more liberal-leaning people that are more like, well, we want to be responsible gun owners. What do we need to do to take all of these steps, as opposed to a cultural thing? I love living in the South. I love being home. I was born in the South. I'm back home. But those are uncomfortable truths that we need to address, and I think that the conservative side of things doesn't want to talk about. It's kind of an elephant in the room that doesn't want to be addressed.
I'd like to ask a question. What gun would you guys recommend as a woman? I know that's probably a question you guys get a lot, but just for the average woman watching this who wants to start carrying a gun, what gun would you recommend for her to get? A handgun or like maybe a shotgun just to keep in the house? Or
I'm gonna take this one, Memphis, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, of course.
Unless you want to identify. You good?
My answer would be short. No.
What size? Any gun that you're most comfortable with, right?
Just a little J-frame, like a little
See,
revolver.
you always got to be trying to do
you
something
can throw in
over
your
here.
purse, right?
J-frame. Okay, so that being said, if you're a J, because anybody going to watch this later, you're watching it live, don't come at us because we're poking fun at J-frames. They're a lot of fun to shoot. They're not that practical for everyday defense.
Yeah.
So my short answer, Jasmine, and I'm glad you asked that. I get asked that question at least once a week in an email or a DM or publicly on social media. In my classes, constantly get that question. We provide firearms for our ladies to shoot so that they can come and try different guns because at the end of the day, the firearm that's best for anyone to start with, but particularly women, is the one that they're most comfortable shooting. And I recommend you either find a firearms instructor that has many different types of firearms. 9mm, typically, I've got most of those. I do have a couple 380s, and 22s are just fun. And don't let anybody tell you a 22 can't stop somebody. Anybody that tells you a 22 can't stop anyone, ask them if you can shoot them with it. It's weird. I've never had anybody take me up on that. It's a funny thing, right? But for some of I teach a lot of elders. We call them Granny Oakleys. And, I can't take credit for that. That was... moniker comes from somebody else, but sometimes that's all they can legitimately handle with their hands, right? If they have arthritis or these issues, and I'd rather them carrying a 22, and have a bunch of little hornets flying at somebody than them trying to rack the slide on a 9mm that they can't rack. So finding an instructor that can help them, or a range that rents different firearms. I believe where you are, the was it that range is, what's it called again? USA?
That's Top Gun Memphis. We do have firearms for you to rent.
Yeah, so go in, and it's worth the money. Spend the money and rent those firearms, and it's worth, people are like, I'd rather just spend the money on a gun. Well, what good is spending $500 on a gun that's going to sit because you decided that you can't shoot it and you don't like it, as opposed to going and spending $200 renting a bunch of different guns, shooting them and going, okay, this is the one I like. Because, ladies, size matters. And the bigger the barrel, the easier it's going to be for you to handle. And I make a joke about that because I'm super immature, like a junior high boy. But the reality is that's true. So women are commonly sold. See, you got me on it, Jasmine, with that question. So, so most women are often sold. I see this one in class all the time, the little Ruger LCP or one of these little 380s. And those little guns are actually kind of painful to shoot, particularly the LCP, because it's a plastic, we call them polymer, but for layman terms, they're a plastic frame gun. So I actually have a 380 on me right now because it's all that fits in my thigh holster. But it's a steel framed one. It's a SIG, right? So it still snaps more than a 9mm, but it's not going to be as bad as those polymer frame guns. But the larger the barrel, the longer the barrel, the larger the gun, as a general rule, the easier the recoil. That's the layman term for that is kickback, but the actual term is recoil. It's the mechanical response that you feel from the gun is going to be less when there's more real estate on the gun. So I suggest carrying the largest firearm that you can. In winter, it's going to be a lot easier, obviously, than in summer. So that's why I like thigh carry or some of these things, and you just learn to adjust. But that is what's more important. And at the end of the day, it's really what gun are you actually going to pick up and carry every day.
Would you mind if I follow that up, Kerry? Yeah. Because this is something that.
Unless you're going to talk about J-frames.
No. So hopefully it got across that I was joking about that. Please do not, just give your wife a J-frame.
Look, internet, take him out. Blow him up.
It's gonna come out. It's gonna be a soundbite. So, look at your local range. And actually look at the classes that they have available. We actually do teach several classes for gateway instruction, such as Welcome to Your Handgun, such as Beyond the Permit, such as Intro to Marksmanship. And we're not the only ones. Almost every range is gonna offer something like that, because you cannot run an entire business based on just permit classes. You can't just do that. So you need to offer something more that people can actually use. Yeah. So. And part of our class, what we talk about is what kind of gun do you need? It needs to be reliable. It needs to be effective. It needs to be concealable. It needs to be ergonomic. Reliable means that it has to go bang every time. Not the 80-year-old, 22 revolver that was bestowed upon you from your granddad, that was passed down from 4 generations. No, that's not going to work. You need something that's going to be reliable. It's got to go bang every time. It needs to be effective. 22s are effective, especially if you pick the right ammo. Do not get the ammo that comes in a 1,000-round bucket that costs $5.99 at Walmart. By the way, Walmart doesn't sell that stuff anymore, but
your Walmart doesn't.
No,
come on down to redneck country.
But Federal Punch is showing some very, very good ballistic results. That stuff is going to work.
So what he's talking about for layman terms is Federal is now making a hollow point 22.
That's right.
In other words, it's going to expand like a hollow point, like a 9mm hollow point. And we could get into that later. That's a whole other conversation.
The ballistics are really, really promising. I think it's going to work for you.
It means it's going to hurt them.
It's going to hurt. Now, it also needs to be concealable. That way, you can actually carry it on your body, and you can have it with you when the 300-pound Thugosaurus tries to rob you or kill you or anything like that. You need to actually have it on you. And it also needs to be ergonomic. It's got to fit your hand. If it's too big for your hand, that's the wrong gun. If it's too small for your hand, it's the wrong gun. And so stuff like this is exactly what Kerry and Jasmine are talking about. This is the type of stuff that people need to know if they're going to pick out a gun for themselves. The first gun you buy is probably not going to be the perfect one. So rent some stuff, try before you buy.
Just like a pair of shoes, right? Like you're going to go and you're going to try on shoes. Some are cute, right? And you're going to have them around for that one little evening. You're going to wear them out.
Yeah.
See, these men are laughing.
Yeah,
But
you
see
see
these women out here like, mm-hmm.
You see a lot of husbands buy stuff, they'll buy a gun for their wife, right?
Oh,
Would you
don't,
buy 'em-
don't.
Would you
don't.
buy the bra? Would you buy a bra for your wife? Would you buy her underwear?
Don't
Let her choose her own gun.
Okay, things just got weird. I'm playing. But, right, we buy a pair of shoes, right? They're shoes that we're going to wear to a certain event for fun, right? And they're probably not going to be as comfortable as that one pair that we're going to wear every day. You're going to invest a little bit more in that pair you're going to wear every day because you want them to. So it's fun to have a bunch of those other kinds of guns that are out there that you might pull out of the safe and go to the range with and have a good time with. But you need to have that one reliable firearm or that pair of shoes that's going to be a go-to every day. Does that help with that, Jasmine?
Yes, it does. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
It was a great question, and I get, like I said, I get asked that question a lot. So Memphis and I were just talking over the break here that we had. We're actually, and we're going to get Jasmine out there. I think we need to put you in the class. We're actually going to do, looks like in September, we're going to do a free class in Memphis. Get some women trained, CCW trained. I have one coming up in May in Spencer. So that is a class that is a paid-for class, although if you need financial aid for anybody that's watching this, let me know. You can email me at wethefemaleofficial@gmail, and we'll get you into that class for free if you want to get in. That one's got limited seating. But we're going to put together a big class out there in Memphis with Memphis and get these women trained. But I think we want to have Jasmine out to talk about how to read some legislation, too. So maybe we'll put you in the class. How do you feel about that?
I would love that. I'm
Awesome.
totally down.
Great.
Probably have just two more for each of you because I know it's blazing up here. For those of you watching or sitting out there, the sun is baking off of this dais, so it's first question, I want to make sure we get a chance to answer whatever order you want. Why, in your opinion, why does the Second Amendment exist? What was its purpose?
In a nutshell, to protect us from a tyrannical government, just in case we ever have to fight back against them. I'm sure that you guys probably know way more to expound on that for everybody listening.
So, just like any of these other amendments and anything else in the Bill of Rights, it's a limit on what the government it's a limit on what the government has. These rights aren't bestowed by the government. They're not. They're given to us. Me personally, I believe that God gave us these rights. They're given to every human being as soon as they're born. And the Bill of Rights is the buffer that keeps the government from taking away those rights. It defines, hey, this is the line you cannot cross. That's why they chose these words, shall not be infringed. That's plain English. That means the same thing 200 years ago that it does now.
So I almost feel like I'm being set up because I know that you guys know I'm a history study. I'm married to a historian. I've studied the Revolutionary War for about 20 years, particularly our women's history, because it does not get acknowledged as much as it should. But for those that actually understand how things went down, and I'll keep this brief because I don't want to get too far into a history lesson because I will geek out about this kind of stuff, is the Revolutionary War did not start with the Boston Tea Party, as a lot of people think. It actually started years before that. And for those people, well, the Founding Fathers would have been stuck. No, they wouldn't have. No. It took them a good 10 years or so of gradually getting more and more pissed. And they still tried to keep from fighting because they knew the gravity of that. But the reason that we ended up having the Second Amendment written started when the British... ask me later if you're interested, and I will actually tell you that what lit that off, because it was actually Ben Franklin talking shit in England, but because he was kind of a shit talker. Okay, he was a huge shit talker. But when Britain started sending a lot more troops, and they started the Quartering Act and putting British soldiers in the house, basically forcing Americans, or the colonists, out of their homes, and then that was yet another of the reasons why these people were getting pissed off. And so the British military and the Crown obviously did not want the citizens, the colonists, the subjects as they were, I shouldn't say citizens, they were subjects, there was no such thing as American citizens at the time. They didn't want them to be able to fight back. And so they wrote, once the war was over and they decided, because it was several years actually before the Constitution got written, because we tried to do it without one and that didn't work well. But there's a reason it's number 2. And because it protects everything else, but then that free speech helps to protect that first one, right? So there's a whole priority. Interesting side note on that, because now you got me on geek things. Did you know that there were 6 drafts of the Second Amendment? No, he didn't. He's going to pretend like he did. So there were 6 drafts of the... did you? I'll get you the book on it. So there were 6 drafts of it. And the first couple of drafts actually said, to paraphrase, James Madison wrote it, not Thomas Jefferson. I told you guys I geek out about this kind of stuff because people need to know it. You need to know this. When you're having these conversations, saying shall not be infringed isn't enough anymore. You need to be able to help educate people about these things. And the first drafts actually said that all able-bodied men will be armed. But they knew that that was a violation of what was to become the First Amendment of freedom of religion, and for particularly at that time Quakers that were pacifists. So that's how the evolution came to be what it is. So my point in bringing that up is when people talk about how these old men, which were not old, I think the average, I'd have to look it up, but I think like the average age of the Founding Fathers was like 34 or something like that. They were actually young. When they say, oh, they didn't know what they were writing or they wrote it for this, no. 6 drafts. They knew exactly what they were writing when they wrote that. And while the overall holistic view of it is to protect us, or being able to take arms to protect ourselves from the government, the SCOTUS has also ruled that that does encompass being able, the right to bear arms, which isn't just firearms, by the way, it's any and all means of self-defense, is for being able to protect yourself not only from the government, but from those that wish to do you harm. I'm not going to apologize for being a history geek, because I'm not. But it's important information that I feel like people should know.
All right, last one. We're just going to do takeaways. If there's one thing that you want to send people away with as an action item today, what is it?
I would definitely say just make sure that you keep up with all of the laws related to the Second Amendment that come up in Tennessee, and always, always, always support the lawmakers who are the ones fighting to keep our Second Amendment intact. Educate as many people as you can about the importance of gun safety or just gun training, so you know how to use a gun. Make sure that you have a respect for guns and know the purpose of them. And yeah, just do whatever we can to keep Tennessee free and to keep us pro 2A.
Yeah. That was eloquent. Thank you. Yeah. So, a lot of us love our families enough to be willing to use deadly force to protect them. Love yourself enough too.
Yeah. Self-defense is self-care. It's probably the most important form of self-care that you can have. And I want to expand a little bit on what Jasmine said. Forget, these people are not your leaders.
Yeah.
They're, took y'all a minute to process that one. I know it's getting warm. They represent you. I don't even call them by representative or congressman unless they have earned my respect. I call them by their first name. Because they work for me. And they work for you. And just like gun violence, right? We have also kneecapped ourselves a little bit by allowing that language to seep in. Our elected leader. No, they ain't leaders. They call themselves that. Start checking them. Because they're not. But most importantly, do not focus heavily on the federal level of gun control legislation. Because as we all know, most of that shit don't get done about anything up there unless they're spending money. Usually to send it to somewhere else, but that's a different rally.
That's next week.
That's next week's rally. But your state is where it matters. The federal government is using the 10th Amendment to take away your Second Amendment because they know that they cannot pass that. The federal government knows that they cannot pass a red flag law because it's a violation not only of the Second, it's a Fourth, Fifth, 14th Amendment, because that's actually, if you don't know what that is, you should look it up. So they know that. And that is why they do things like create these committees and these organizations in the Office of Gun Violence Prevention that is now supported by the red flag law, business, right? So pay attention to your state and pay attention closely. Get on the email list for your state anytime new legislation comes up, and not just gun legislation, because more often than not, they will try to put red flag laws into health care bills and try to make it a public health crisis or any sort of version of that. Yes, it is hard to read. It is exhausting to read that legislation, but that's where people like Jasmine come in. They can come in and help you understand not only what it says, but how it's going to affect your life every day, because that is where they're going to get you. So stop sleeping on it and stop thinking that you're doing something just because you're talking some shit on the internet. Get out there, get involved, and push back. And I want to add, lastly on this, do not think that just because somebody is a Republican that they're pro-2A. You have a governor right now that is pushing for a red flag law. Hold him accountable. Hold them all accountable. Just because they're quote-unquote on your side doesn't mean shit when it comes to your gun rights. So if they are stepping sideways on it, get rid of them, and get rid of them at the lowest possible elected representative level that you can, because the minute they go up the food chain, they're harder to get rid of. So hold your local, pay attention in your state, and hold your local elected representatives accountable, because after all, you're the one paying them.